The story of modern Israel's creation is often told as a triumphant return, a persecuted people reclaiming their ancestral home. But zoom in, and the reality is far messier. Imagine redrawing a land sacred to Jews, Christians and Muslims with a ruler and a crayon. What followed was a geopolitical car crash. The 1947 UN partition, backed by the US, sliced through villages and families, treating holy sites with reckless abandon. Jerusalem was to be shared, a plan as unworkable as it sounds. The creation of Israel was meant to solve the horror of Jewish persecution, especially after the Holocaust. But there's another layer. For some, especially in American Christianity, Israel's rebirth was seen as prophecy fulfilled, a step toward the end times. This belief surprisingly shaped US foreign policy. So, was Israel's creation just about sanctuary? Or was it also about fulfilling ancient prophecy? We'll unpack the political deals, the strange alliances, and the human cost of trying to solve a modern crisis with a 2,000-year-old script. Because when prophecy meets politics, the results are rarely simple. Before the US took center stage, Britain made a fateful promise. The 1917 Balfour Declaration. It pledged support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, while also promising not to harm the rights of the non-Jewish population. Britain essentially promised the same land to two peoples, with only a vague hope they'd get along. Why? Not pure altruism. Britain wanted influence near the Suez Canal and hoped to win Jewish support in World War I. There was also a streak of Christian Zionism among British leaders, who saw restoring Jews to the Holy Land as a biblical mission. The result? A promise Britain couldn't keep, setting the stage for decades of conflict. The Balfour Declaration wasn't a solution. It was the lighting of a very long fuse. It was a European power making decisions about a non-European land, with little regard for those who lived there. The consequences would echo for generations. The fuse was lit, and the region would never be the same. After World War I, Britain was handed the mandate for Palestine, told to govern a land it had helped destabilize. For 3 decades, British officials tried to balance Jewish immigration and Arab rights, but only fueled resentment on both sides. Jewish immigration surged as Nazism rose in Europe, escalating tensions and violence. Both Jews and Arabs formed militias, each feeling betrayed by British double-dealing. Daily life became a battleground. Villagers like Fatima saw their world upended, while refugees like David saw Palestine as their only hope. The British responded with reports, restrictions, and eventually walls and barbed wire, pleasing no one. By 1947, exhausted and broke, Britain handed the problem to the United Nations. The Mandate period left deep scars, land lost, lives uprooted, and trust shattered. The international community, having drawn the lines, now watched as the region edged toward disaster. The fuse was burning down. The bomb was about to go off. The world braced for what came next. The consequences would be felt for generations. When Britain left and the UN voted for partition, conflict exploded into the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. For Jews, it was a fight for survival and statehood. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, the catastrophe of displacement. David, now a fighter, saw abandoned villages as necessary for Israel's birth. Survival trumped moral questions. Fatima's family fled their village expecting to return, only to become permanent refugees. Her family's key became a symbol of loss, their olive groves now part of Israel. As a result, Palestinians were displaced, fueling a grievance that endures. 1948 was dual reality. One people's independence and safety from future anti-Semitism, which rises cyclically in history, and another's where they feel some of their land slipping away. No simple villains, just people caught in history's gears. David's new nation rose on the ruins of Fatima's old life. The world, having drawn the lines, mostly watched as the region burned. The trauma of that year set the stage for decades of conflict. The cycle of violence and displacement had begun. The legacy of 1948 still shapes lives today. Like and subscribe now. Where was the US? At first a supporting actor, but after World War II, America stepped up, President Truman recognized Israel just minutes after its declaration. Truman's decision was driven by politics, personal faith, and pressure from Americans. He saw himself as a modern-day Cyrus, fulfilling biblical prophecy. But his advisors warned support for Israel could alienate the Arab world and threaten U.S. interests. Early U.S. support was cautious. France was Israel's main arms supplier for years. The alliance deepened over time, but it wasn't yet the sacred covenant it would become. Domestic politics and religious belief were already shaping U.S. policy. The groundwork for a special relationship was laid. But it would take another war and a religious movement to make it unbreakable. The story was just getting started. Enter Christian Zionists, a force that would transform U.S. policy. Christian Zionism, rooted in American evangelicalism, sees Israel's existence as biblical prophecy fulfilled and a step toward the Second Coming. For millions of Americans, supporting Israel is a religious duty, not just politics. Their theology, dispensationalism, reads the Bible as a literal roadmap. Jews must return, Israel must exist, and prophecy will unfold. This bloc is massive, organized, and politically powerful, unconditional in its support for Israel. They oppose any land concessions, seeing them as defying God's plan. Politicians know back Israel, win votes and donations. Televangelists and conservative groups made this theology a political force, especially in the Republican Party. Suddenly, biblical prophecy was shaping U.S. foreign policy. 1967's Six-Day War was Israel's coming of age, a stunning military victory that redrew the map. Israel seized many sacred parts of Israel in under a week. For Israelis, it was miraculous having their sacred land returned. For Palestinians, another disaster. The conflict shifted. Now it was about occupation, not just existence. The land for peace formula was born. For the U.S., Israel became a strategic asset, a bulwark against communist Soviet influence. The alliance deepened, military aid flowed, and Israel's military became world-class. For Christians, the capture of Jerusalem and biblical lands was proof of prophecy. The political and prophetic had merged. The U.S.-Israel relationship became both strategic and sacred. The occupation would define the conflict for decades. The stakes and the passions were higher than ever. The world watched as prophecy and power collided. What became of Fatima and David? Their stories mirror millions. David, once a refugee, helped build Israel, but lived with the moral weight of conflict and occupation. His descendants grew up in a nation defined by both resilience and perpetual struggle. Israel thrived, but trauma and anxiety became part of daily life. Fatima never returned home. Her family's key became a symbol of loss and steadfastness. The Palestinian identity was forged in exile, defined by resilience and memory. Her descendants in Gaza, the West Bank, or abroad still live with the consequences of 1948. These stories aren't mutually exclusive, they're two sides of the same coin. The conflict's human cost is staggering: walls, checkpoints, loss, and fear. The trauma endures, shaping every generation. So, was US support for Israel prophecy fulfilled or political strategy? The answer, both intertwined. Strategists saw Israel as a vital ally, a democratic outpost and military powerhouse in a volatile region. During the Cold War, Israel was a bulwark against communist Soviet influence, later a partner in the war on terror. Billions in aid and diplomatic cover were justified as smart geopolitics. But the American Christian movement supercharged this alliance, making it untouchable. Politicians could frame support for Israel as both strategic and divinely ordained. Some, like Truman, believed in prophecy. Most saw the political advantage. The result, US policy locked into unconditional support, often at odds with its own stated goals. The fusion of faith and strategy created a feedback loop, each justifying the other. The relationship became uniquely rigid, resistant to change. The cost, peace and stability remain elusive. The legacy is a policy shaped by both God and geopolitics. So here we are. Decades later, the story unfinished. A British promise, a UN resolution, and US interests collided with ancient prophecy to create today's Middle East. The US helped shape Israel into both the democratic marvel of the region and an occupying power. The fusion of strategy and prophecy made US policy uniquely inflexible. This isn't conspiracy, just the reality of interest, lobbies and theology shaping a special relationship. The result? A conflict with no easy solution, tangled in competing narratives and traumas. Understanding this history isn't about blame, it's about seeing the forces at play. Recognizing American Christianity's role explains why US policy is so resistant to change. Ask what drives the unbreakable bond, values, strategy or theology. The call isn't to pick sides, but to understand the complete picture. The story isn't over, but understanding it is the only way forward. Like and subscribe now.